Well, and welcome to this week's A Photographic Life. And I'd like to start off by talking about a photographer who some of you may be aware of, primarily, I think, for his great work in colour. But I've got a different reason this week for talking about this photographer. Well, who am I talking about? Well, it's Harry Gruyaert, who was born in 1941 in Antwerp, Belgium, and studied at the School for Photo and Cinema in Brussels from 1959 to 1962. He began working on a freelance basis in Paris while working as a director of photography for Flemish television. And I think that is an important clue as to what I'm going to be talking about this week. But anyway, in 1969, he made his first trip to Morocco, and the resulting work won him the Kodak Prize in 1976, and was published, I should say, in the book Morocco in 1990. In 1972, he photographed the Summer Olympic Games in Munich and the first Apollo flights as they were shown on a television set. This series, TV Shots, was first exhibited at the Delpierre Gallery in 1974 and later elsewhere. It was published in a book in 2007. Gruyaert was experimenting with Kodachrome colour film for his documentary work in the late 1960s, contemporary with work by people such as Ernst Haas, William Eggleston and Joel Mervitz, touted by US commentators as the new colour. Alongside Alex Webb, he's one of the first in the Magnum Agency to shoot entirely in colour when he was invited to join in 1982. But it is his television images that I am most interested in this week. As Gruyaert said, I was living in London at the end of the 1960s when I became aware of the brainwashing power of television. I became interested in making a portrait of England by photographing the TV screen. So not only was he doing the space rockets there and also the Olympics, but also documenting a country. Well, why this is important to me, two reasons really. I've seen a lot of comments over the past few weeks, how could you escape the World Cup? But let's not get onto that conversation. But a lot of comments about photographers photographing the action on their television screens and then, of course, turning it into their own photography. I suppose, in a way, there's a sense here that how can you possibly make photographs through a screen and not actually by being there, which raises all sorts of interesting discussion points, I think, for photography in general. I find it a slightly strange sensitivity, and here's why. Because back in 1987, I had my degree show at St Martin's School of Art, and as part of that degree show, you put up work on a wall, and I had created my own magazine called Loaded, funnily enough, a long way before the James Brown version. I'd stolen the title from a Velvet Underground album that just happened to be sitting on my record shelves. But anyway, so as part of the Loaded magazine that I was designing at the time, I did a few double-page spreads on Bob Dylan. No surprise there to regular listeners or long-term listeners. Anyway, the way in which I got images in those days was to put a camera in front of the television and to put a VHS, I should say, video on the screen, pause it, rather poor quality in those days, and put my camera in front of it and take a picture onto colour transparency, which I then got processed, which I then got turned into Cibachrome prints. Now, the work was criticised as part of my degree show by my lecturers as feeling that it had some kind of a distance to it, that it wasn't really what photography was about. We're talking about in 1986, and Gruyaert was making his work at least 15 years earlier. Never mind, I'm not bitter, he says, all these years later. But when I was seeing all these comments about photographers making work off of the television screen, obviously I was transported back to that particularly traumatic experience because I didn't understand what my lecturers were saying at the time. As far as I was concerned, I was making images of a live event. I just happen not to have been there. And I feel the same about the sports photography, actually, because you've still got to be able to either stop the frame stop the television, pause the streaming, whatever it may be, and you've got to identify that composition, that moment, which is exactly what you've got to do as a sports photographer. In a way, of course, it's a lot easier because you haven't got all of the issues that a sports photographer has to deal with, let alone having to get the images going straight from their camera directly to whichever agency, usually Getty, are syndicating the work. But also what it made me feel was that I've been talking to my students, and I have a number of young sports photographers who I teach and who've gone on to be really successful. And I've been encouraging them to not only look towards the documenting of live action, but also towards the behind the scenes, the documentary, the lifestyle, the people, the portraits, and learning how to tell narratives around these events, which of course you can't do when you're just looking at a TV screen. And the reason for that is I do feel that as we go forward, an awful lot of the live action photography from sports we see will be grabbed from the moving image. Anyway, 1986 to 2026. There you go. Nothing changes. Whilst we're talking about time moving on, I think it's difficult to avoid, well, certainly my algorithm has a difficulty avoiding, visuals of singers from the past appearing again live on stage. Recently, McCartney, Rod Stewart, the Human League, Tom Jones, and even Barry Manilow, the B-52s and the Revillos have all turned up on my YouTube algorithm. People from the audience on their phones recording concerts. All those people are out and about performing live. I don't think I'd want to go and see them, I have to say. For me, memories are memories. But also, I suppose one of the reasons why I have all this stuff appearing on my algorithm is because I have a huge interest in Bob Dylan, and therefore I'm always checking out as to how he sounded the night before. Anyway, what it made me think about is, what do photographers do when they get old? Do they keep on trying to churn out the same hits of the past? Or do they try and reinterpret themselves into a way which is perhaps more appropriate for their age, for their way of seeing the world? It seems strange to me to keep trying to recreate something that you wrote in the same way you sang it in the 1960s when you were 18, 19 years of age, or in the early 1980s. Of course, as you get older, you can't hit those notes and it all seems a little bit ridiculous. I think photographers need to think in the same way. In a sense, be a bit more Bob Dylan, dare I say. Don't try and recreate, reimagine, try things differently. Be appropriate to your age. I know that's one for the older listener, but maybe it's also relevant to the younger listener. Maybe you should be thinking about that. Is the work you're making appropriate for your age? In a sense, I think in photography, we get pulled in to trying to make work that we think is right. But it's actually what we should do is make work that's right for us. A couple of little roundup pieces now, I think. One of them is about photo judges, and it's about being up front in and centre in announcing that they are a judge of a photographic competition. I'm now seeing lots of judges appearing on Instagram and on Threads saying, so pleased to be a judge of such and such competition. This is really quite wide-ranging. I did talk about this a few episodes ago, where a particular judge was asking for particular types of photographers to apply for the competition. And that didn't sit well with me at all. I think, if my memory serves me rightly, it was even for World Press Photo. But anyway, this idea of the judge coming forth and promoting themselves and the competition doesn't sit well with me, I have to say. I know photo competitions don't sit well with me anyway, particularly those that have a high point of entry, or in fact any point of entry in the current economic climate in which we live in. It does mean that the work chosen, as I've said many, many times before, is not necessarily the best work being produced. It's the best work that the judges like. So the word best there becomes very subjective, but also that's been entered by the photographers who can afford to enter, or even that saw the marketing. So there are a number of kind of barriers there, I think. And in a world where there's so much, or a photographic world, there's so much discussion around gatekeepers, surely those points of entry are true gatekeepers there. Anyway, is it ethically correct, I suppose is where I'm at with this, for a photographer to do that? By promoting themselves, by promoting their work, they're saying to anybody who's entering, you better make work like I do, that I like, if you're going to enter, because I'm the judge. Maybe that's a reading between the lines, but I don't think those lines are too far apart. Anyways, I said there's a couple of things I wanted to pick up on. Another one is a social media account, and I've seen a few of these, and I've seen them online also just as websites, which is people saying that they can get you commissions for magazines such as Elle, Glamour and Vogue, etc. The pitch, the sales pitch, is get in touch with me because these magazines are looking for photographers to shoot editorial commissions for them, and I'm the person who can help you. Not me, I should say. In the past, I was definitely the person because I was an art director of Elle and also of Tatler magazine, and therefore I was involved in that commissioning process. So I know how it works, and it doesn't work that they get other people whom they're going to pay to find photographers for them to shoot their commissions. I suppose in a sense what these people are doing is they're preying on a sense of ignorance that photographers have as to how the world of professional photography works. So I'm sure many of you listening know exactly what I'm going to say, but let me just run through it very quickly. The people on the magazine commission you. They make the choice as to which photographer they want and how the photograph is going to be used. They are not going to use a third party to do this. You may get direct messages on Instagram, you might get emails, you might get all sorts of stuff promising you something other than that. Immediately delete them, bin them, or report them, or block them. I don't mind what you do. But for goodness sake, make sure you're not taken in by them. And definitely, absolutely definitely, do not make any financial contribution to that third party. You won't get a return on your investment. And in fact, you might not get anything at all. Readers' letters. There you go. I promised you a jingle for listeners' letters, and that's the best I could do. Pretty poor, I agree with you, but at least it's an announcement. I will work on it, of course. Maybe we'll get some different versions on the go and you can vote for your favourite. Anyway, this week, just one letter that I wanted to bring to you. It says, "Hi Grant, I've just listened to your Proust quiz with Roger Ballon, which reminded me that I have what I think is a first edition of his first book, Dorps, published by a Cape Town publisher in 1986. I recently drew up my will, which got me to thinking where my photographic books should go when I die. My relatives will probably give them to Oxfam, but there is probably a more appropriate place where they could go. Any suggestions? By the way, dorp is an Afrikaans word for village. When used in an English language context, it is pejorative. You could easily substitute the word dump. The pictures have a flavour of the American Dust Bowl. Love the podcast, Ian." Well, thank you very much, Ian, for your letter this week. My advice actually is very simple and is based on some personal experience. I think we all go through a stage in our lives when we have to write our own will, or alternatively, we may have to help our relatives or parents with their will. And in my own experience, what I've found is that it's very difficult to actually get everything that's in a house listed as to where people want it to go and so forth. So my recommendation is, and this is what I have done, and I've been informed by my solicitor that this is a good idea, is to get the person or you yourself write a letter, and actually in that letter, as well as your general chattels, your possessions, which would go to the executor of your will to disperse, you can make specific requests. And therefore, within that letter, which you have to get signed and witnessed and then submit to your solicitor to keep, you could name specific people that, for example, you wanted to get your photography books, or somewhere that you want them to go. So it really is a question of taking control of all of those elements. It might be your camera equipment, it might be your photo books, your work, your archive. Just make sure that you let the people know that when you no longer can tell them in person what you want done with them and where you want to go. And don't forget, if your family are not interested in photography in particular, maybe they could go to somewhere else. I have to say, I do quite often get offered archives of photo books that people say, well, we don't know what to do with them. Do you want them? And I have to say, I invariably say yes, and then regret it enormously because I've got nowhere to put them. But to me, I can't bear the thought of them being thrown away. Maybe you listening to this feel the same. Do let me know, of course, your own experiences with this, both positive and negative. Just a little bit of news to finish up this week's episode, which is that we are now posting the United Nations of Photography 20 best lists at unitednationsofphotography.com. These are very much personal lists that I'm putting together. So yes, I know there will be people you feel that shouldn't be on the lists, or people you feel I've missed off. That's fine. I'm okay with that. And when you choose 20, it's always going to be subjective, and people are going to be left off the list. But anyway, you can find UNP Top 20 conflict photographers, photographers who kept it personal, music photographers, urban photographers, portrait photographers, fashion photographers, wandering photographers, landscape photographers, and photographers working with colour. Each one of those is a separate list, and as I say, that's all at unitednationsofphotography.com. So if you're looking for a little bit of education, aspiration, and inspiration, why don't you check out those lists? As always, we've got great stuff coming up over the next few weeks. We're going to be replacing the World Cup, I suppose, and we're going to be going on holiday with you. So take us with you by subscribing and liking, if you could possibly do that. And of course, the one thing that I ask all of you to do every week in these trying times is please, please, please take care.